They said an Omega was worthless without a mate. They said I was nothing but a broken toy to be discarded in the snow. But they were wrong. My name is Seraphina Hart, and the night my fated mate rejected me was the night I saved the world without even knowing it. I didn't find just one stray dog in the blizzard that night. I found 12. 12 lethal killers, 12 broken soldiers, and one king who was watching my every move. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of how I went from a pack outcast to the Queen of the North in a single night. You think you know rejection? You haven't heard anything yet. The sound of a champagne glass shattering against the hardwood floor was the only warning Seraphina got. It was the winter solstice gala, the most important night of the year for the Silver Creek Pack. The majestic hall of the Mercer estate was decked in silver ribbons and white roses, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted venison, and the underlying musk of 300 shifting wolves. Seraphina Hart stood near the kitchen doors, holding a tray of empty flutes. She wasn't a guest, she was staff. Despite being born into the pack, her status as an Omega with low shifting energy made her invisible. Or so she thought. Seraphina. The voice was low, familiar, and tore through her chest like a rusted hook. She froze. The tray trembled in her hands. She turned to see him, Silas Mercer, the alpha hare, the man whose scent pine and rain had haunted her dreams since she turned 18 3 days ago. Her fated mate. But Silas wasn't looking at her with love. He was looking at her with a cold, detached annoyance, the way one looks at a stain on the silk shirt. Standing arm in arm with him was Jessica Thorne, the beta daughter of the pack's lead enforcer. Jessica was beautiful, sharp, and cruel. She smirked, sipping her drink. Silas, Seraphina whispered, her wolf whimpering inside her. I felt the bond. Did you? I felt it? Silas interrupted, his voice raising loud enough to silence the nearby conversations. The music seemed to dim, and that is why we are doing this now, publicly. I cannot have rumors tarnishing the transition of power. He stepped forward, the crowd parted. Seraphina felt small, her cheap black uniform itching against her skin. I, Silas Mercer, future alpha of Silver Creek, he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, reject you, Seraphina Hart, as my mate. The pain hit her instantly, a physical snap in her chest, like a rib cracking. Seraphina gasped, dropping the tray. Crystals shattered everywhere. She fell to her knees, clutching her heart, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The rejection of a fated mate wasn't just emotional, it was biological agony. I accept your rejection, she choked out, forced by the ancient laws to complete the ritual, though it felt like swallowing glass. Good, Silas said, stepping over the broken glass and her trembling form. Now get out. My father, Alpha Gerald, agrees that having a rejected mate in the pack house is bad for morale. You're exiled to the old Miller cabin on the edge of the territory. Tonight. The Miller cabin, someone whispered in the crowd. That place has no insulation. Ideally, she'll freeze before morning. Jessica laughed, a high tinkling sound. Don't worry, Silas. I'll make a much better Luna. Strong bloodlines only. Silas didn't look back. Security. Escort, miss. Hart to the perimeter. If she returns to the main grounds, shoot to kill. Dragged out the back door by 2 burly guards, Kevin and Mike, men she had grown up with, men who used to trade baseball cards with her brother before he died in the Boundary Wars. They didn't look her in the eye. They threw her into the mud of the back alley, tossing a meager duffel bag of her belongings after her. Sorry, Sarah, Kevin muttered, closing the heavy iron gate. Alpha's orders. The sky broke open. The blizzard that had been threatening the Pacific Northwest all week finally descended. The wind howled like a dying god, and the temperature plummeted. Seraphina stood up, wiping mud and tears from her face. She looked at the warm, glowing windows of the mansion one last time. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She turned her collar up against the biting wind and started the 5-mile trek to the old Miller cabin. If they wanted her to die, she decided right then and there she would survive just to spite them. The old Miller cabin was a rotting husk of timber and moss, located in the Dead Zone, a strip of forest between the Silver Creek territory and the wild, unpatrolled mountains. The roof leaked, the windows were cracked, and the only heat source was a cast-iron wood stove that hadn't been lit in a decade. Serafina reached it by midnight. Her fingers were blue, her lips numb. She kicked the door open, the rusty hinges screaming in protest. It smelled of mildew and rats. "Home sweet home," she muttered, her voice breaking. She spent the next hour in a frenzy of survival. She gathered dry wood from the crawl space, lit the stove with a pack of matches she kept in her pocket, and stuffed rags into the window cracks. The fire sputtered to life, offering a tiny circle of warmth in the freezing dark. She sat on the dusty floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. The bond pain was a dull ache now, a hollow void where Silas used to be. She closed her eyes, letting the tears finally fall. Thump. Serafina's eyes snapped open. The sound came from outside. Thump. Scratch. It wasn't the wind. It was heavy, organic. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a rusty fire poker. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to sound like an alpha, not a terrified omega. No answer, just a low-pained whine. Serafina hesitated. It could be a rogue of feral wolf driven mad by the isolation. Opening that door could mean death. But the whine came again, desperate and weak. It sounded like a pup, her omega instincts, usually dormant, flared. Protect, nurture. She unlatched the door and cracked it open against the howling wind. What she saw stopped her heart. Lying in the snow were wolves. Not one, not two, but a pile of them, massive dark shapes half buried in the drift. They were huge, far larger than the average Silver Creek wolf. Their fur was matted with blood and ice. She counted quickly, her breath hitching. 12 massive wolves collapsed in her front yard. The one closest to the door was a gargantuan midnight black wolf. He was conscious, barely, his golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. He growled a low, rumbling warning, but he couldn't stand. His flank was torn open, a deep, jagged wound that oozed dark blood onto the pristine snow. "You're dying," Serafina whispered. The black wolf bared his teeth, trying to push himself up to defend the others, but his legs gave out. He collapsed, his muzzle landing in the snow with a huff. Serafina looked at the others. A russet-colored wolf with a broken leg, a gray one with burns along its back. They looked like they had been through a war zone. "If I leave you here, you're dead by morning," she said to the wind. "If I bring you in, Silas will kill me for harboring rogues." She looked at the black wolf again. His eyes were dimming. He looked regal. Even in the mud and blood, there was a power radiating off him that made Silas feel like a puppy. "To hell with Silas," she hissed. She dropped the poker and stepped into the storm. Dragging 12 massive wolves into a small cabin was physically impossible for a human. But Serafina was a wolf, even if she couldn't shift fully due to malnutrition and stress. She channeled every ounce of her latent strength. She started with the smaller ones, dragging them by their scruffs across the floorboards, arranging them near the stove. They were heavy, dead weight. She grunted, sweating despite the freezing cold. When she got to the black wolf, she couldn't move him. He was easily 300 pounds of muscle. "You have to help me," she pleaded, gripping his thick fur. "Please." The black wolf blinked. He seemed to understand. With a groan of agony, he pushed with his hind legs while she pulled. Inch by inch, they crossed the threshold. She slammed the door shut and collapsed against it, panting. The cabin was now packed wall to wall with wet, bleeding wolves. The smell of copper and wet fur was overpowering. Serafina didn't rest. She grabbed her only clean towel, a bucket of snow to melt on the stove, and her small first aid kit. Okay, she said, kneeling beside the black wolf. Let's see what we're dealing with. As she reached for his wound, the black wolf snapped his jaws inches from her hand. Serafina didn't flinch. She slapped his nose. Lightly, but firmly. Stop it, she scolded. I'm the only thing standing between you and death, so be a good boy, or I'll put you back outside. The other wolves, those who were conscious, went still. The black wolf stared at her, shocked. No one slapped an alpha, especially not one this size. Slowly, the black wolf lowered his head and let out a huff that sounded suspiciously like a sigh. He allowed her to touch the wound. For the rest of the night, Serafina Hart didn't sleep. She cleaned wounds, stitched gashes with a sewing needle and fishing line, and splinted broken bones with firewood. She melted snow and forced water down their throats. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know that she was currently stitching up the commander of the Royal Guard, the king's spy master, and the deadliest assassins in the continent. And she certainly didn't know that the black wolf watching her with golden, calculating eyes was Dominic Blackwood, the Alpha King of all North America. The storm raged for 3 days. Inside the cabin, a strange domestic routine emerged. Serafina called it the Hospital for Bad Dogs. She learned their personalities quickly, even in their wolf forms. There was Bax, the russet wolf. He was whiny. He would howl dramatically whenever she changed his bandages. There was Riper, a sleek gray female who watched the windows constantly, always on guard. There was Tank, a massive bulldog of a wolf who just wanted his belly rubbed and would nudge Serafina's hand whenever she sat down. And then there was the boss. That's what she called the Black Wolf. He healed with supernatural speed. By the second day, he was limping around the cabin, watching her. He didn't act like a wolf. He acted like a man trapped in a wolf's body. He wouldn't eat the raw rabbit she managed to snare. He waited until she roasted it. He didn't sleep on the floor. He claimed one ragged armchair, sitting in it with a posture that screamed authority. On the third night, the food ran out. Serafina sat by the fire, her stomach growling. She had given the last of the meat to Tonk, who was recovering slowest. The boss nudged her knee with his wet nose. She looked down. He pushed a piece of the rabbit meat she had given him back toward her. "I'm not hungry, boss," she lied, smiling weakly. He growled low in his throat and nudged it harder, leaving a grease stain on her jeans. He wasn't asking. "Fine," she whispered, taking the bite. "You're bossy, you know that? When you shift back, I bet you're a real headache for your wife." The wolf froze. He stared at her, his golden eyes unblinking. Then he leaned forward and licked a tear she hadn't realized had fallen down her cheek. "I don't have a husband anymore," she confessed to the wolf, the loneliness crushing her. "He rejected me. For a beta with better hair and a richer daddy." The black wolf's ears flattened. A low vibrating growl started in his chest, so deep it rattled the floorboards. It wasn't a growl of aggression toward her. It was a growl of protection. The other 11 wolves raised their heads, their eyes glowing in the dark, mirroring their leader's anger. Serafina laughed nervously. "Hey, easy. It's okay. I'm an Omega. It happens." The boss stood up. He walked to the door, sniffed the crack, and looked back at her. He seemed to be calculating, assessing the threat. Suddenly the silence of the night was shattered. Boom! The door exploded inward. Splinters flew everywhere. Serafina screamed, scrambling backward. Standing in the doorway, framed by the swirling snow, were 4 men holding assault rifles. They wore tactical gear with no pack markings. Mercenaries. "Found them," the lead mercenary shouted into a radio. "Target is confirmed. The king is here. And he's hurt." Serafina's blood ran cold. "The king?" The mercenary raised his rifle, aiming not at the wolves, but at Serafina. No witnesses. Time seemed to slow down. Serafina squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bullet. It never came. A black blur launched itself across the room. The boss hit the mercenary with the force of a freight train. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and the man went down, screaming. The cabin erupted into chaos. The 12 strays were no longer injured invalids. They were a coordinated death squad. Viper tore the throat out of the second gunman. Tank slammed the third through the wall. Seraphina pressed herself into the corner, covering her head. It was over in 10 seconds. The 4 mercenaries lay dead on the floor. Silence returned, heavier than before. Seraphina trembled, looking up. The black wolf stood over the leader's body, his muzzle bloodied. He turned to look at her. He didn't look like a pet anymore. He looked like a monster, a beautiful, terrifying monster. Slowly, the sound of bones cracking filled the room. The black wolf was shifting. Fur retracted into skin. The snout shortened. The paws became hands. A man rose from where the wolf had stood. He was naked, but he carried himself with such terrifying dignity that it didn't matter. He was tall, over 6'4", with a body carved from granite and scars that told stories of 1,000 battles. His hair was dark as midnight, wet with sweat and snow. But it was the eyes she recognized. Burning gold. He walked toward her, ignoring the carnage around him. He knelt in front of her, disregarding his nudity, focusing entirely on her terrified face. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, like gravel grinding together. Seraphina shook her head, unable to speak. "Good," he said. He reached out, his large hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a speck of dust. "You called me boss." Seraphina squeaked. "My name," he said, his eyes searching hers, "is Dominic. And you, Seraphina Hart, just saved the life of the Alpha King." He stood up and turned to the other wolves, who were also shifting back into human forms, men and women, all scarred, all looking at Seraphina with awe. "Shift," Dominic commanded his team. "Gear up. We have been found. The insurrectionists know we are alive." He turned back to Seraphina. "You cannot stay here. They saw your face. They will burn this cabin to the ground. Where do I go?" she whispered. Dominic extended a hand to her. "You come with me. You fed me when I was starving. You sheltered my command when we were broken. You're under my protection now." He paused, a dark, dangerous smirk curling his lips. "And I would very much like to meet this Silas, who thought you weren't good enough." "Burn it," Dominic commanded. His voice was devoid of sentiment. He stood in the snow, wearing tactical pants and a thermal shirt that one of his men, a giant named Titan, had pulled from a buried cache near the tree line. Seraphina watched as Valerie, the woman who had been the gray wolf, splashed kerosene from an old lantern across the rotting floorboards of the Miller cabin. With a flick of a lighter, the only home Seraphina had known for the last 24 hours went up in a roar of orange and yellow. The heat was intense, melting the snow in a widening circle. Seraphina shivered, but not from the cold. She was shivering from the adrenaline crash. "You're shaking," Dominic said. He wasn't looking at the fire, he was looking at her. Before she could answer, he shrugged off the heavy tactical jacket he had just put on and draped it over her shoulders. It engulfed her small frame, smelling of leather, gun oil, and hemoscent like crushed cedar and ozone that made her inner wolf scratch at the surface, desperate to get closer. "I'm fine," she lied, pulling the jacket tighter. "That was my stuff inside. We will replace it," Dominic said dismissively. "Everything you lost I will return tenfold. That is the law of the debt." "The debt? You saved a king," a new voice chimed in. It was the russet-haired man, Jax, who was currently checking the magazine of his rifle. He grinned, though his face was bruised purple. "King's law, sweetheart. You saved the crown. The crown owns you. Well, not owns you like a slave. More like you get a black card with no limit and a permanent security detail. It's a good gig, better than living in a shed." "Jax, shut up," Dominic growled. He turned back to Seraphina. "We need to move. The extraction point is 3 miles east, on the ridge. Can you walk?" "I walked 5 miles in a blizzard to get here yesterday," Seraphina said, lifting her chin. "I can walk 3. She took a step and immediately hissed in pain. Her boots were cheap, thin-soled things, and the blisters from her exile walk had rubbed raw. Dominic didn't ask again. He simply swept her up into his arms. "Put me down," she squeaked, grabbing his shoulders for balance. "I can walk." "You are slowing us down," Dominic stated flatly, starting to hike up the incline as if she weighed nothing. "And you're injured. My medic, Jax, will treat your feet once we are airborne. Until then, you ride." The trek through the dead zone was brutal. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the wind whipped through the trees like invisible razors. Yet in Dominic's arms, Serafina felt a strange, terrifying safety. His body heat was like a furnace. Every time she shivered, his arms tightened imperceptibly around her. "Who are they?" Serafina whispered after a mile, looking at the squad moving in a protective diamond formation around them. "The men who attacked us." "The Red Hand," Dominic answered, his jaw tight. "A faction of traditionalists. They believe the monarchy is too soft on humans and omegas. They want to return to the old ways. The savage ways. They poisoned the king's wine," Titan rumbled from behind them, his voice like gravel. "During the Solstice Peace Summit. We had to shift and run before the neurotoxin paralyzed our human forms. That's why we were stuck as wolves. The toxin blocks the ability to shift back until it metabolizes." Serafina's eyes widened. "That's why you were dying. It wasn't just the cold. You kept us warm enough to metabolize the poison," Dominic said softly, looking down at her. His golden eyes caught the moonlight. "You did just stitch wounds, Serafina. You bought us time. If we had fallen asleep in that snow, we would never have woken up." They reached the ridge an hour later. The sound of rhythmic thumping filled the air. Two massive black helicopters rose from the valley floor, their searchlights cutting through the storm. They bore the royal crested gold wolf's head on a black shield. As the choppers landed, kicking up a whirlwind of snow, Dominic didn't put her down. He carried her straight onto the lead bird, shielding her face from the rotor wash with his body. He strapped her into a leather bucket seat and sat directly across from her, buckling his own harness. The interior of the helicopter was like a flying command center screens, satellite uplinks, and a rack of heavy weaponry. Headsets on. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Dominic put a headset over Serafina's ears, dampening the roar of the engines. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic looked at a digital map on the screen next to him. He tapped a location. "We need to refuel before we make the jump to the capital, and we need to deal with the local issue." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "The mercenaries who found us, they had local intel. Someone in this territory tipped them off that there was strange wolf activity in the dead zone. Someone sold us out." Serafina's stomach dropped. "Silver Creek." "Exactly," Dominic said. "We are going to pay a visit to Alpha Gerald. And Silas," she whispered, the name tasting like bile. Dominic's hands clenched into fists on his knees. The leather of his gloves creaked. "Silas, the boy who rejected you. How did you know? I heard you talking to me when I was a wolf," Dominic admitted. "You said he rejected you for a beta. You said you were exiled." He leaned forward, unbuckling his harness as the helicopter leveled out. He reached across the aisle, taking her hand. His skin was rough, calloused, and electric. "Serafina, look at me." She looked up. The intensity in his eyes made her breath hitch. It wasn't pity. It was possessiveness. "Rejection creates a void in a wolf's soul," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "It kills the weak. But you are not weak, and nature abhors a vacuum. When a bond is severed unjustly, the fates often intervene." "What do you mean?" He ran his thumb over her knuckles. "I mean that when I was lying on your floor, bleeding out, the only thing keeping me anchored to the living world was your heartbeat. It synced with mine. That shouldn't happen with a stranger." He pulled back before she could process the implications, turning to Titan. "Load the weapons," the king commanded. "We're landing on the Silver Creek Foot lawn in 20 minutes. If anyone draws a weapon, put them down. Rules of engagement, boss, Titan asked, racking the slide of a heavy assault rifle. Dominic looked at Seraphina, his eyes dark with a promise of violence. Scorched earth. The Silver Creek packhouse was in the middle of a celebration. Even though the solstice gala had been the night before, the party had continued. Alpha Gerald was officially stepping down, and Silas was to be sworn in as Alpha at noon. The morning brunch was a lavish affair on the heated patio, despite the snow covering the grounds. Silas stood at the head of the table, holding a glass of mimosa. Jessica was draped over his shoulder, wearing a white fur coat that probably cost more than Seraphina's entire life earnings. To the future, Silas toasted, his handsome face flushed with alcohol and victory. To a stronger bloodline, and to the removal of dead weight. The pack elites laughed. Jessica giggled, kissing his cheek. I heard the storm got bad last night, she purred loud enough for the table to hear. Do you think the little Omega found a squirrel to cuddle with? Or is she a popsicle by now? Who cares? Silas shrugged. She's gone. The bond is broken. I feel lighter. The laughter was cut short by a deep, thrumming vibration that rattled the silverware on the tables. The guests looked up. The champagne in Silas' glass rippled. Is that thunder? Jessica asked. No, Alpha Gerald said, standing up, his eyes narrowing. That's an engine. From the low gray clouds, two black shapes descended like birds of prey. The wind from the rotors hit the patio with hurricane force. Tables overturned, expensive crystal shattered. Ladies screamed, clutching their hats and fleeing inside. What is the meaning of this? Silas shouted, trying to shield his face. This is private airspace. The helicopters didn't care. They touched down heavily on the pristine snow-covered lawn, their landing gear tearing up the turf. The door slid open before the rotors even stopped spinning. Armed soldiers in black tactical gear poured out. They moved with fluid, terrifying precision, forming a perimeter. Their chest plates bore the royal insignia. The Royal Guard, Alpha Gerald whispered, his face draining of color. Why are they here? Then a figure stepped out of a lead helicopter. Dominic Blackwood did not look like a diplomat. He looked like a warlord. He wore a fitted black combat suit, a heavy trench coat billowing behind him, and a sidearm strapped to his thigh. He walked toward the patio with a stride that ate up the distance. Behind him, flanked by the massive figure of Titan and the lethal grace of Valerie, walked Seraphina. She had changed. She wore black cargo pants, combat boots, and a thick tactical sweater that swallowed her small frame. Her hair was pulled back in a severe braid. She looked tired, pale, but she was walking with her head high. Silas dropped his glass. It shattered on the stone patio, mimicking the sound of his heart skipping a beat. Seraphina, he choked out. The music stopped. The pack members who hadn't fled stared in disbelief. The Omega who had been thrown into the mud 12 hours ago was now walking at the right hand of the king. Dominic stopped at the base of the patio stairs. He didn't speak. He just stared. The weight of his alpha aura hit the crowd like a physical blow. Lower-ranked wolves instantly dropped to their knees, whining. Even Silas felt the urge to submit, his knees trembling. Alpha Gerald Mercer, Dominic said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the silence. And Silas Mercer, Your Majesty, Gerald stammered, bowing low. We are honored. We didn't know you were. Save it. Dominic cut him off. He walked up the stairs, the sound of his boots heavy on the stone. He stopped in front of Silas. Silas was tall, 6'1", but Dominic towered over him. The king looked down at the new Alpha with open contempt. You must be Silas, Dominic said. I've heard a lot about you. Silas swallowed hard, glancing at Seraphina. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She was staring at Jessica, who looked like she was about to vomit. Your Majesty, Silas said, trying to regain his composure. This is unexpected. And why is this exile with you? She is a rejected Omega. She is not permitted on pack lands. Dominic tilted his head. Is that so? Yes, Jessica piped up, trying to sound authoritative. She was banished for weakness. She has no wolf, she's useless, Dominic laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. Useless, he repeated. He turned to Titan. Tell them. Titan stepped forward, his voice booming. Last night, the king and his elite guard were ambushed by the Red Hand. We were poisoned. We were dying. This woman, he gestured to Seraphina, dragged 12 fully shifted wolves out of a blizzard. She defended us. She stitched us up. She saved the life of the king of North America. Titan glared at Silas. She has more wolf in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline, boy. A gasp went through the crowd. Silas looked at Seraphina, shock warring with confusion. You saved him? She did, Dominic said, which makes her a hero of the realm. And under royal law, anyone who insults a hero of the realm insults the crown. Dominic took a step closer to Silas. But that is not why I am here. He reached into his coat and pulled out a stack of documents. He threw them onto the brunch table, knocking over a pitcher of juice. My intelligence officers just finished scrubbing the comms of the mercenaries who attacked us, Dominic said, his voice turning to ice. They were using a localized frequency, a frequency that originated from this estate. Alpha Gerald let out a strangled noise. Your Majesty, that's impossible. Silence, Dominic roared. The power of his voice cracked the patio stones. He turned his golden gaze on Gerald. He sold my location to the Red Hand. You thought if I died, the council would elect a weaker alpha. Perhaps you? No, never, Gerald cried, falling to his knees. Titan, arrest him, Dominic ordered. Treason carries the death penalty. We will interrogate him at the Citadel. 2 guards grabbed the screaming Alpha Gerald and dragged him toward the helicopters. Silas stood frozen, watching his father be hauled away. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know. Perhaps, Dominic said. Or perhaps you are just incompetent. Either way, you are now the alpha of a pack under investigation for regicide. Dominic turned to Seraphina. He held out his hand. Seraphina, he said softly. Come here. She stepped forward, standing next to him. This man rejected you, Dominic said to her, loud enough for everyone to hear. He threw you away because he wanted strength. He wanted status. Dominic turned back to Silas. Look at her, Mercer. Really look at her. Silas looked. He saw the dirt on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes. But he also saw the way the king's guards looked at her with reverence. He saw the way the king himself stood, angled toward her, a shield against the world. And for the first time, Silas felt a flicker of the bond he had severed. It was a phantom pain, a realization of a massive mistake. Silas started. You wanted a Luna, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. But you were too blind to see that a queen was standing in your kitchen. Dominic wrapped an arm around Seraphina's waist. It was a claim, a public declaration. She is leaving with me, Dominic stated. She is under my personal protection. And if you, or that beta standing next to you, ever speak her name again, I will return. And I won't be bringing lawyers. I will be bringing war. Wait, Jessica shrieked, her jealousy overriding her self-preservation. You can't just take her. She's pack property. Dominic stopped. He slowly turned his head to look at Jessica. His eyes flashed a brilliant, terrifying gold. She is not property. Dominic snarled, his canines lengthening as he fought the shift. She is the only reason you are all breathing today. He looked down at Seraphina. Ready to go? Seraphina looked at Silas one last time. He looked small, pathetic. The love she had felt for him for years evaporated, replaced by a cold indifference. I'm ready, she said clearly. Good. Dominic guided her back toward the helicopter. As they walked away, leaving the Silver Creek leadership in ruins, Dominic leaned down to her ear. That was the easy part, he murmured. Now we have to find out who else in my court wants me dead. You're not just a guest anymore, Seraphina. You're my witness, and I'm afraid I'm going to need you to stay by my side for a long time. Seraphina looked up at him. How long? Dominic smirked, a dangerous, handsome look that made her toes curl. Forever seems like a good starting point. The obsidian citadel was not a castle. It was a fortress carved directly into the side of the Blacktooth Mountain. It was a place of sharp angles, cold stone, and breathtaking luxury. For Seraphina, who had spent the last few years sleeping in a drafty servant's quarters and the last 24 hours in a war zone, it was overwhelming. She stood in the center of the king's private suite space, larger than the entire Mercer estate. The floor was heated marble. The windows were bulletproof glass overlooking the sprawling capital city of Oakhaven, and the bed was draped in silks that cost more than a small country. "It is to your liking." Seraphina jumped. Dominic was leaning against the door frame. He had showered and changed into a crisp white dress shirt and dark slacks, looking less like a warlord and more like a devastatingly handsome CEO. But the predator was still there, lurking in the golden depths of his eyes. "It's too much," Seraphina admitted, hugging her arms around herself. "I'm just an Omega, Dominic. I should be in the staff quarters. People will talk." Dominic walked into the room. The air shifted, heavy with his scent cedar, rain, and raw power. He stopped inches from her. "Let them talk," he said low. "They had been talking about me for centuries. They call me the Butcher King, the Heartless Alpha. Let them add the man who obsesses over his savior to the list." He reached out, his fingers grazing the bruise on her neck, where the collar of her uniform had rubbed her raw during the trek. "You are not just anything, Seraphina. My physician, Dr. Eris, examined the blood samples from the cabin. Do you know what he found?" She shook her head, trembling as his thumb traced her jawline. "My wolf shadow is an ancient," Dominic explained softly. "His energy is too volatile for normal wolves. That is why I have no mate. Every woman the council presented to me, their wolves cowered. They couldn't handle the proximity to my energy field. It physically hurt them." He stepped closer, his chest brushing hers. "But you slept on the floor with 12 injured wolves curled up against an ancient alpha. And you didn't just survive. You thrived. You absorbed the excess energy and used it to keep us warm." Dominic's eyes burned. "Silas Mercer is a fool. He thought you were weak because you couldn't shift. You couldn't shift because your vessel was built to hold power that a normal pack couldn't provide. You weren't weak, Seraphina. You were starving for an alpha strong enough to feed your soul." Seraphina's breath hitched. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Dominic whispered, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear, "that when Silas rejected you, he didn't break you. He freed you." Before she could respond, a knock at the door shattered the moment. "Enter," Dominic growled, clearly annoyed, stepping back, but keeping a possessive hand on her lower back. Titan entered, looking grim. He held a tablet. "Boss, we have a problem." Dominic's face hardened instantly. "Report. We interrogated Gerald. He cracked after 10 minutes. He didn't orchestrate the hit. He was just the pawn. He was paid to shut down the perimeter sensors so the Red Hand could enter." "Who paid him?" Titan swiped the screen and handed it to the king. "The transfer came from a shell corporation. We traced the IP. It originated from inside the Citadel." The room went cold. "A traitor in the court," Dominic said, his voice void of emotion. "It gets worse," Titan continued. "The IP belongs to Duke Sterling's private office, the head of the council." Dominic stared at the tablet. Duke Sterling was his godfather, the man who had raised him after his parents died in the Great War, the man who had taught him how to rule. "Are you sure?" Dominic asked, his voice barely audible. 100%, Titan said, "and there's more. We intercepted a comm signal. Sterling knows you survived. He knows Seraphina is the variable he didn't account for. He's planning to finish the job tonight." "Tonight?" Seraphina asked. "What's tonight?" Dominic looked at her, a mask of cold fury sliding over his features. "Tonight is the Blood Moon Ball," he said. "The entire aristocracy will be there. All the alphas, all the press. Sterling is planning to assassinate me in front of everyone to show that the king is weak. He turned to Serafina. Titan, get the jet ready. Take her to the safe house in the Alps. No, Serafina said. Both men looked at her. No, Dominic raised an eyebrow. If I leave, he wins, Serafina said, her voice shaking but her eyes steady. He wants to show you're weak. If you hide the woman who saved you, you look afraid. If you send me away, you look like you have something to lose. She took a step toward the king. I spent my whole life hiding in the back of a kitchen, terrified of people who hated me. I'm done hiding. If this duke wants to kill us, let him try. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then a slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found his perfect hunting partner. Titan, Dominic barked. Cancel the jet. He turned back to Serafina. Get the stylist, he commanded. Dress her, not as a guest. Dress her like a queen. If Sterling wants a show, we're going to give him a spectacle he'll never forget. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Citadel was a sea of black ties and diamond gowns. The air was thick with the scent of champagne and fear. Rumors were flying. The king was dead. The king was alive. The king had gone mad. Duke Sterling stood near the throne holding a glass of scotch. He was an older man, distinguished, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He checked his watch. It's time, he whispered to his aide. Prepare the announcement. We will mourn the tragic loss of King Dominic and announce the interim council. Crack. The massive double doors at the end of the hall didn't just open. They were thrown wide by 4 royal guards. The room went silent. Music swelled, not a funeral dirge but a war anthem. Dominic Blackwood walked in. He wore his formal military dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, a sword at his hip. He looked healthy. He looked lethal. He looked serious, but no one was looking at the king. On his arm was a vision. Serafina wore a gown of liquid gold that clung to her curves like a second skin. The back was open, revealing the faint scars of her past, now worn like badges of honor. Her hair was a cascade of curls, and around her neck sat the star of the North diamond necklace that hadn't been worn since Dominic's mother died. Impossible, Duke Sterling gasped, dropping his glass. Dominic led Serafina through the parting crowd. He didn't walk fast, he prowled. Every step was a statement. I am here. She is mine. They reached the dais where the throne sat. Dominic didn't sit. He stood at the edge, looking down at the hundreds of faces. My friends, Dominic's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. And my enemies, his eyes locked onto Duke Sterling. Tonight was supposed to be a funeral, Dominic said calmly. There was a plot, a poison, an ambush in the snow. I was meant to die in the cold forgotten. He pulled Serafina forward. But the traitors forgot one thing. The strength of an Omega. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. An Omega wearing the Star of the North. This woman, Dominic continued, walked into hell to pull me out. She possesses a loyalty that none of you with your titles and your armies could ever hope to match. Suddenly a voice rang out from the crowd. She is a reject. It was Silas. He had pushed his way to the front, looking disheveled and desperate. Dominic, King, you cannot do this. She is my mate. I rejected her, yes, but I take it back. The bond. I feel the bond coming back. Silas scrambled up the steps, his hand outstretched toward Serafina. Serafina, please. I made a mistake. I see it now. You look incredible. We can rule Silver Creek together. Just come to me. Serafina looked down at the man who had broken her heart. She felt the pull, the biological urge to comfort him. Then she felt Dominic's hand on her back. Warm, steady, real. Silas, Serafina said into the microphone. Her voice was clear as a bell. Yes, my love. Silas breathed, hope lighting his eyes. You didn't want me when I was in rags, she said. You don't get me now that I'm in gold. She turned to Dominic. "I accept your protection, my king," Silas roared, his ego shattering. "She is mine." He lunged, his claws extending, aiming to grab her. Bang! Silas fell backward, clutching his shoulder. Duke Sterling had drawn a pistol and fired, not at Dominic, at Silas. "Enough of this soap opera," Sterling shouted, signaling to the balcony. "Kill them all. The Red Hand takes the throne tonight." 20 assassins rappelled from the ceiling, shattering the skylights. The ballroom erupted into screams. "Titan, now!" Dominic roared. The Elite 12, who had been disguised as waiters and guests, shed their jackets. Weapons appeared from nowhere. The ballroom became a battlefield. Sterling aimed his gun at Dominic's heart. "Goodbye, godson." Seraphina didn't think. She moved. She grabbed a heavy silver candelabra from the banquet table and swung it with all the force of a woman who had chopped wood for survival. The heavy base connected with Sterling's wrist. Bone cracked. The gun flew skittering across the floor. Sterling screamed, clutching his arm, and fell to his knees. Dominic was on him in a second. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He grabbed Sterling by the throat and lifted him one-handed off the ground. "You missed," Dominic snarled. Around them, the Elite 12 made short work of the assassins. Within 60 seconds, the room was silent again, save for the whimpering of the injured. Dominic dropped Sterling at the feet of the Royal Guard. "Take him to the dungeons. Make sure he lives long enough to tell us every single name on his payroll." He turned to the room, his chest heaving. He was covered in glass and dust, but he had never looked more regal. He turned to Seraphina. She was breathing hard, still holding the dented candelabra. Dominic laughed, a genuine, joyous sound. "You just assaulted the head of the council with table decor," he said, admiration shining in his eyes. "He was going to shoot you," she shrugged, dropping the candelabra. Dominic stepped closer. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something much more potent. The bond. It hit them both at the same time. Now that the danger was over, the biological imperative took over. Dominic's scent overwhelmed her. Her scent drove him to the brink of madness. "Seraphina Hart," Dominic said, his voice rough. He dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. "The Alpha King never bowed. You saved my life in the cabin. You saved my honor in the court. And you saved me just now from a bullet. I don't want to owe you a debt anymore." He took her hand. "I want to owe you my life, forever." "Dominic," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I, Dominic Blackwood, Alpha King, reject the solitary path." He recited the ancient vows. "I claim you, Seraphina Hart, as my fated mate, not because the moon told me to, but because I choose you, my equal, my queen." He looked up at her, golden eyes glowing. "Will you have me, a broken soldier with a temper?" Seraphina looked at Silas, who was being dragged away by guards weeping. Then she looked at Dominic. "I don't need a soldier," she smiled, pulling him up to his feet. "I need a partner. And yes, boss, I'll have you." Dominic didn't wait for applause. He crashed his lips onto hers, sealing the bond in front of the entire kingdom. As they kissed, a golden light erupted from their chests, the sign of a true royal mate bond, rare and powerful enough to shake the foundations of the citadel. Outside, the storm finally broke, revealing a dawn sky painted in hues of violet and gold. The rejected Omega was gone. Long live the Luna Queen. And that is the legend of Seraphina and Dominic. From a frozen cabin in the dead zone to the golden throne of the North, they proved that true power isn't about fangs or claws. It's about the heart. Silas spent the rest of his life in the dungeons, watching the woman he rejected change the world, while Seraphina and her 12 stray wolves ushered in a golden age of peace. What do you think? Did Silas deserve a second chance, or did he get exactly what was coming to him? And what would you have done if you found 12 wolves on your doorstep? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and redemption, please smash that like button, share this video with your pack, and subscribe for more werewolf romances that will keep you howling for more. Until next time, until Max